Compelling character art and beautiful backgrounds are not enough. If you rely exclusively on flashy drawings, your comic will be a boring sequence of prison blocks. The reading experience becomes a punishment when everything is square after square of monotonous camera angles and repetitive layouts. It's not just what you show, but how you frame it, so let's talk about paneling.
By the end of this lesson, you'll have a pocket full of quick techniques and big picture concepts to jailbreak dull compositions and let your story run free.
Think of paneling as cinematography for comics, but instead of working with video edits, you have page space. Movies use audio, camera moves, juxtaposition to convey story. Paneling is your toolkit to convey those same effects. Even primitive art can spring to life and pull readers in if the paneling is compelling. So let's break this toolkit down and see what we're working with.
The arrangement of panels on a page we'll call page layout, and the contents inside of those panels we'll call frame composition. Let's jump into page layouts first.
You could see Bill Watterson of Calvin and Hobbes fame struggling against the tyranny of rectangles as his career progressed. He would push the boundaries at every opportunity, and his comic went from good to great as a result. Now you are free from the restrictions of newspaper format comics, so you have an infinite menu of creative layout options. Instead of a square panel, how about a circle, or a transparent overlay, or word balloons shaped like orangutans?
The thing about more freedom is, there are also more ways to go wrong. So how do you tell a bad creative choice from a good one? First off, what is a comic panel?
Technically, a comic panel is one bounded space, whether encapsulated by a real or implied boundary, contrasting it within a space.
We don't need a deep dive into ontology here. More important is to understand what a comic panel does. Comic panels progress time forward.
Now, you can have multiple panels showing the same instant from different angles, or a series of instants depicted inside of a single panel. Panels are versatile, but generally, readers expect a new panel to show a forward progression in time.
But how much time? Sometimes it's a split second, and sometimes the space between panels can span decades.
Readers will use the context to decide how long the panel's time increments are. The panel's structure is the border of the frame, something to indicate where a panel starts and stops. Now, panel borders don't have to be straight-laced. They can be zigzaggy, impressionistic. You can use vignettes and negative space to define panels.
Before we get fancy with the spices, recall the number one purpose of a book, to tell a coherent story. This is the one thing the rectangles approach achieves: clarity. Nobody gets confused.
Think of page layouts on a continuum, from static at one end to dynamic at the other. High-energy page layouts are intense, but risk derailing the reader with confusion. So when you step away from the prison of squares, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Ensure your panel composition flows correctly from top to bottom, left to right. The best place, in fact, maybe the only place to plan this out, is during the thumbnailing stage.
In the all-important thumbnailing stage, every big picture page layout decision will be made. Don't rush through the thumbnails. This is the blueprint for the house you'll be spending hours and hours in. Make sure you like that floor plan.
Think about where your audience will look first and plan their visual journey from panel to panel. One tactic that can help: word balloons. But they can also hurt. A tangle of word balloons scattered across the page with tails crossing each other and getting into sword fights can skewer the dynamic flow.
But they can just as easily make things flow smoother.
Who says word balloons have to be trapped inside one panel only? They can make fantastic transitional devices, overlapping the border of one panel and leading the reader to the next panel with ease. In fact, one light bulb moment I had from looking at Eisner's work was the use of word balloons in place of panel borders. You can get that dialogue out of the way and just walk it along the bottom of the scene, scoring a nice vignette panel with clear flow in the bargain. We've even experimented with making the character nestled inside a word balloon itself as the entire panel contour.
When planning your shot composition, it helps to know where the word balloons are going to be first. This can minimize unintentional balloon tail sword fights and transforms balloons from just a text delivery service into an elegant page layout tool.
This is why I've drifted away from a trope of modern webcomics, which is to use transparency effects on word balloons. I do understand the temptation. All that pretty drawing, why should we deprive the audience of it? With transparency, they can see all the art and all the words at the same time. The best of both worlds. But if you pull back and look at the big picture, it can look overworked and muddled. So rather than think of word balloons as a thing that gets in the way of your art, think of them as part of your art, an integral compositional element of the page flow.
turn them into visual pockets of negative space that enhance your composition.
But all things in moderation? A general note on word balloons and comic scripting. Beware the tendency to script comics the way you'd script an anime or a movie. It is the easiest thing in the world to just write dialogue bouncing back and forth between characters. After all, what comes naturally when there's a keyboard right there at your fingertips? But comics are a visual medium, and unlike anime, every line of dialogue will take up crucial visual real estate. Listening to dialogue is a totally different experience from reading dialogue. Pages stuffed top to bottom with word balloons scream amateur, and even someone interested in your story may resort to skimming. It's boring to draw a soap opera, and it's boring to read one.
Every rule does have exceptions. Sometimes a pile of funny or insightful dialogue is just a ticket. But bear in mind, comics are optimal for sequential visual action. Show the emotional changes of your characters, their body language, juxtapose their dialogue with key props. Something like 90% of human communication is nonverbal. A novel cannot leverage body language, but a comic can.
Use dialogue on the run when the characters are doing something as they talk. And especially in a comic, when you are scripting, always be alert for opportunities where you can make actions speak louder than words. Think about how much time is elapsing within each panel. Does the dialogue fit? If a character is leaping into action and reciting 3 acts of Shakespeare before they hit the ground, either the artist is deliberately infusing surrealism into their story, or something is busted.
So we've got word balloons clearly articulated. The other major ingredient is, of course, panels. While the rectangles get the job done, you have permission to go beyond. Panels can be circles, they can have jagged borders, scribbles, they can be vignettes with implied edges. You can use foreground cutouts as negative space. They can be big, small, double-page spreads. The possibilities are manifold. So how do you know which technique to use?
The one that conveys your story the most effectively. In this page from Dreamkeepers Volume 3, Lilith is being stalked through the library by Tendril as he smashes lights out, plunging the floor into darkness. The doors are twisted shut, and Lilith realizes there is no running and maybe not even any hiding. Notice how the panels become narrower and narrower as we move down the page, contributing to the psychological feeling of being trapped, having the walls closing in, the panels forming a literal funnel. When Lilith encounters the twisted doors, she has an emotional surge of dismay, a feeling accented by the jagged panel borders. All the borders on the page are somewhat irregular, adding to the sense of disorientation and panicked reaction. Tendril's word balloons circle the main panel as he roams the rows, smashing out lights, and we get a large bird's-eye view establishing shot, moving closer and closer to Lilith as her situation hits home. Putting these exact same images into 6 equally sized rectangles would get the basic idea across. But here, the paneling and page layout are leveraged to convey to the reader how a character feels without a single thought balloon needed. That is the power of paneling. Color, texture, negative space, open, constricted. It's a huge dial to control the emotional tone and delivery of your story. Often the reader will be channeling the emotions of the main character, or you could provide the reader with a more objective standpoint and use neutral paneling to emphasize how unrelatable a character's tantrum is. It's all up to you. Thinking through your paneling choices opens the door to these creative options.
To add some more tools to your page layout kit, let's look at fundamental 2D design concepts. Even glancing at a list of these will help refresh the possibilities in your mind when you sit down to thumbnail your pages.
The contrast principle is crucial, and not just when it comes to value contrast, although even at the stage of page layouts, you can start planning your major areas of light and shadow. Also, contemplate organic shapes versus rectilinear shapes, small panels versus large panels, dense areas of detail versus areas of open simplicity. Without contrast, everything slips into homogeneity, so especially at the big picture level of planning, think in terms of contrast.
Primary, secondary, and accents, not just for color schemes. A dynamic 2D design will often feature one primary dominant shape or shape cluster with a counterpoint, then peppered in the image to spice it up, tertiary repeating accents. A composition with a dozen elements where every element is the focus means that none of them are the focus. What panel on your page is the most important, the most visually enticing, and has the most emotional energy? Odds are it should be the largest with secondary shapes to offer a counterpoint, and then accents bring up the rear. Effective compositions will have a visual hierarchy, even if it's subtle.
Overlap brings appealing dimensional elements into cartoon characters, and it has the same effect with panel compositions. Watch out for sharp, painful tangencies, and use overlap as a tool to add depth and intuitive flow from one panel to the next.
Rather than have even train windows of panels crossing a page, it can help the composition breathe to cluster smaller panels together especially when showing moment-by-moment action. And if your composition needs a dominant element, but no one panel fits the bill, you can cluster them into a mega shape to get the job done. Thinking of it this way, you can create a larger overall shape with panels nested inside, like a Russian nesting doll. This can help big picture cohesion to a composition while still getting the advantages of a series of multiple panels.
And last but definitely not least, you cannot think too much about negative space. It's the secret sauce that can take a page from looking claustrophobic to being a delightful river of eye candy. In fact, especially if you have some elaborate detailed set pieces, it will serve you well to incorporate negative space as a contrasting element. While computer screens tend to turn white space into a blinding malevolent force, print media is the opposite. Seeing page space woven amidst the art is one of the most appealing things to look at in print. It provides little visual vacations for the eye.
And speaking of print, let's remember a few things if you ever want your book to see print. Specifically page numbers, spine area, and trim and bleed areas. It may sound dull, but if you sleep on this stuff, you may have a lovingly crafted book that has crucial dialogue chilling in the spine glue where no reader will ever see it. They'll just see it slipping out of their grasp, like an astronaut on their event horizon.
I use custom printed thumbnail layouts based on our planned print size. They include bleeds, page numbers, and a no-go zone where the spine pulls the paper in. I mean, you can still have art extend into those areas, of course, just make sure it's not content which is crucial for understanding the story. So now you have a handy tool belt for your page layouts. Set up your thumbnail with evens and odds, use 2D design principles like negative space, contrast, and overlap, retain your clarity while experimenting with novel panel borders and shapes to emphasize the story, and take word balloons from an art obstruction into an elegant method of enhancing flow. But one thing we didn't touch on at all, how do we compose the images inside of the panels?
It's the next logical lesson in how to create comics the Dreamkeeper's way. We'll delve further into cinematography, how to use camera tricks and drawings, tying viewpoint and perspective to your story, and key compositional concepts to ensure the illustrations inside your well-placed panels are coming to life.
Any questions? Let us know in the comments. We'll be sure to dive in and answer the ones that come in within a week or so of posting this. And if you'd like to scope out our comic for inspiration or just for fun, it's free to read at dreamkeeperscomic.com.
And as always, a huge thank you to the backers who make all of this possible. Enjoy the pledge pins, voting, daily artifacts, and everything else. You are the best. Thank you everyone for watching. We're happy if any of these tips inspire your work. Have fun and create what you love.